Some voices don't speak, they steady you. And today I'm sitting down with Dr. Mekel Harris, a psychologist, an author, and grief expert whose work has helped countless people navigate the unthinkable with tenderness and truth. Dr. Mekel has lived the kind of loss that rearranges a life, yet she continues to show up with a presence that is both grounding and deeply human. As she writes so beautifully, grief is not a problem to solve, but a companion to learn. In our conversation, you will hear how she learned to walk with that companion, how she found language for the ache, and how she now guides others towards healing that is honest. It's compassionate, and it's sustainable. Her story is one of courage and clarity and the quiet strength that comes from choosing to stay open when closing off would be so much easier to do. So I want you to settle in, get your coffee, and let Dr. Mekel's wisdom remind you that even in the deepest valleys of your life, you are not walking alone. I hope you enjoy it. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Broken Beautiful Me, stories of hope, gratitude, and resilience. And I am so honored today to have as my guest Dr. Mekel Harris. She has a BA in psychology from Baylor University, an MA in psychology from Houston Baptist University, and a PhD in clinical school psychology from the University of Houston. Further to that, she completed her pre-doctoral internship and 2-year postdoctoral fellowship at the Children's Hospital in Los Angeles. Since then, Dr. Harris has served in higher education along with community and hospital-based mental health programs. She currently works in private practice as a licensed psychologist and CEO of Harris Psychological Services, LLC, offering mental health support across the lifespan. Dr. Harris also provides training, education, and consultation to organizations around the globe focused on an array of mental health themes. She is the co-founder of Bloomwell Partners, LLC, a consulting firm that equips corporate entities with the skills necessary to afford grief-informed leadership and care within the workplace. Throughout the past decade, Dr. Harris has presented over 30 domestic and international conferences and has been interviewed on several podcasts with topics ranging from grief and loss to community mental health and trauma. In her personal time, Dr. Harris enjoys spending time with her family, traveling the globe, writing, volunteering in her community, and collecting all things butterflies. Butterflies, me too.
Yes.
Welcome. I'm so happy to have you here.
No, I am so thrilled to be here. As I thought about our time this morning, I was just getting more and more excited to just see how our organic conversation flows, and just really grateful for the invitation. So thank you, Kelly.
Oh, that's wonderful. So why don't you start us off by giving us kind of an overview of the work that you're doing and how you got there?
Yes. Okay, so that is a very interesting tale. I'll start off by sharing that never in a million years did I think my career would be focused on grief and loss. I started off my career in early childhood intervention, worked at a children's cancer facility, and that was really my first entry point into death. But it wasn't until December 2012 when my mom died after a 30-day wrestle with stage 4 pancreatic cancer that I knew that I needed to pivot. And basically, when she died, I realized that there really wasn't a lot of support around grief and loss. Certainly, I was seeking out support, but really wanting to get that grief and loss niche intervention. I couldn't find it. So I decided, the universe, God decided that grief and loss was something that I needed to focus on to be what I needed at the time. So that's what sort of led me into the grief and loss space. So these
Mm.
days, as you mentioned, I have a small private practice where I provide one-on-one services for clients. But the vast majority of what I do are speaking engagements around the globe. And then you mentioned Bloomwell. So a lot of organizational training focused on equipping leaders with the tools to provide support to grieving employees.
I don't know if you noticed, but I couldn't help but smile when I read that part about equipping leaders
Yeah.
with the tools to help with grief.
Hmm.
That's a big one.
Yes.
When really we have this 3-day compassionate leave,
Hmm.
it doesn't fit with the actual road of grief.
Right.
And so I love that you are recognizing that there's a different component. It's not just the bereaved that need assistance. It is also the people who interact with the bereaved and
Hmm.
how they can be uh, equipped with the tools, but also comfortable to stay in the room.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that so I'll go back to when my mom died. I was
Mhm.
working in academia at the time. And I remember my mom died on December 9th, 2012. And so in academia, we were actually on a holiday break. So I returned back to work in January. And it was really interesting in that I'd received the condolence card in the plant from my team, but there was an awkward silence from the people in my workplace around her death when I got back. And
Mhm.
honestly, Kelly, it was the gap between myself and them was so wide that at a certain point, I actually considered quitting the job because I felt so invisible in the workplace. And that's
Mm.
really the experience, unfortunately, that a lot of grieving employees have is that not only are they having to come back to work within 48 hours, 72 hours after this incredible loss, but then they're met with invisibility and workplace silences, which actually makes the grief process be even more challenging and isolating. And so that's really driven the work that I and my business co founder do. But it is important, as you mentioned, that it's not just about the person coming back. Grief is a communal experience. And so a large
Mhm.
part of the conversations that I and my partner have are around the impact, sort of the expanded impact of grief beyond the employee. How does that affect the organizational culture as a whole?
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, when you talk about that communal impact, we are all touched by grief at one point or another in our lives.
Hmm.
And I always find it interesting if you look at indigenous cultures, which I gain so much wisdom from learning in communities, and I'm from Canada. And
Okay.
so, like, I remember when I lived in Western Canada, and I was watching a ceremony, a
Hmm.
memorial ceremony,
Hmm.
and all of the group was part of it. There was a comfort there of
Hmm.
celebrating this person who had passed. Everybody showed up. There was, I guess, a tradition of how the ceremonial remembrance. Have we gotten away from that as a society so that we feel more isolated? Are we not doing the things that we need to be doing?
Yeah. Well, I think from a Western society perspective, I don't know if we've ever fully been there, but certainly I think with the development of technology and things that have sort of driven hyper independence, coupled with the fact that I think in general we are basically a pain avoidant society, that we've
Yeah.
drifted further and further away from the communal aspects and sort of focused on, okay, that person's grieving, that's their individual problem. And so, in the workplace, if you think about just that ripple effect, it's important to realize that when one person's grieving and they're coming back to work, let's say that person's experiencing challenges with decision making, concentration, and fatigue. Well, that affects the rest of that team. And that larger ripple effect affects the organization as a whole. So we've got to start having these conversations around moving away from the individualistic perspective about grief to more of that community approach. And so that's a large part of what we talk about and really attempt to sell organizations is that while it may not seem that it's communal, it truly is. And here are the data to show that.
What do you think about the long term effects of COVID? Not only with the isolation
Hmm.
of all of us
Hmm.
and changing the social aspect of how we approach life, but during that time, people who lost loved ones, there could be no services. If there was a service, it was virtual or it
Hmm.
was, just a few people could go.
Hmm.
What do you think of the long-term effects of that and what should we be doing to get back to a place where we are more connected to each other, especially in grief?
Yeah. I was actually one of those folks who was impacted by COVID directly. So my dad passed away on March 23rd, 2020, of
Okay.
congestive heart failure. And
Yeah.
because of the status of the world at that time with the pandemic, my family wasn't able to be with him. So he passed away in a hospital. And then his services, there was a limitation. He was a veteran, but there was a limitation with the VA for the number of people who could participate. So the max was 10 people. And it is very difficult to think that a person who lived such a vivacious, vibrant life and impacted so many people was not able to
Mm.
be celebrated in the way that he celebrated others. And so that has been extremely difficult. And I know that I'm not alone in that.
Mhm.
It's followed by now we have this experience where you can't really honor your loved one, and then an extended period of time where you can't connect really in a live fashion with other people. And so I think to your point, the question about COVID impact, I think the remote nature of work has shifted, obviously. To
Yeah.
this day, a lot of companies have still kind of continued with the remote aspect, and that has made this conversation about community even more difficult.
Mhm.
We sort of love to sell this idea that getting on Zoom calls and seeing the panels and squares on the screen is community. However, there's still a level of distance, obviously, and with cameras off, anonymity to some extent
Yes.
in that
Yeah.
space. So I think organizations have to be very intentional about number one, naming grief. I mean, before we start talking about community, we've got to get comfortable naming the elephant in the room, and then from there, how can we be intentional about creating opportunities to keep those conversations alive in the workplace? One thing I'll mention, Kelly, that we didn't comment on is when we're talking about grief from our organizational perspective, we're not just talking about physical death. We're talking about those invisible losses as well, like divorce, like
Mhm.
identity shifts with your career, loss of dreams, right? Layoffs, turnover, all of these things that happen within organizations are all different types of losses. And so, again, it's important that we first name the reality and then create space to talk about that.
I am so glad that you brought that up because there are so many losses that don't involve the death of a loved one.
Hmm.
One of the things that I've encountered on my path is talking to people with chronic disease whose they don't have the life that they had planned for, and they're grieving
Hmm.
that change, that they
Hmm.
have to come to a new conclusion about where they're going to go. So grief extends into every area of our life.
It does. I like to say that, and this is going to sound a little bit cynical, but bear with me for a moment. We're born into the world, and almost immediately, loss begins, right? So, we're babies, we're there, we're craving our parent, caregiver. They provide that, but there are moments where that caregiver is not available, right? We enter school and we have that disconnection from our families for the day, but then we get into a classroom where kids are very different and people are rejecting us. And we continue to age. And so grief starts from day one all the way throughout the lifespan, which is so interesting to think about the fact that it's universal, yet it's so avoided. And so, again, I think part of the work that we've got to do is really acknowledge this is part of our humanity. There's a universality of grief that, while frightening and uncertain, is also a beautiful gift towards connection between all of us. That's the one thing we can all relate to.
Yeah, that is it. I'm so glad that you bring that up. You talked about the profound difference it made when a colleague simply sat with you in your grief
Hmm.
compared to the silence or pressure to push through that you experienced elsewhere. What does it mean to truly companion someone in their grief? I thought this was so beautiful. And why is presence so powerful?
Yeah. We as human beings have four fundamental needs. Every single one of us, it doesn't matter our background, our upbringing, our ethnicity, nothing. We all want to be seen, we all want to be known, and we all want our experience to be validated in some way, right?
Hmm.
And soothed as we experience these life experiences. And so I think that when it comes to loss, it doesn't change, right? The example that I like to share, Kelly, is to sort of imagine if you were standing on the shore, looking out at, let's say, a beautiful beach, some water, and you look out in the distance and you see this beautiful sunset. One of the things that makes that moment really powerful, of course, you see it, but just imagine someone else walking up and looking out in the distance. And without even saying a word, there's an awareness that you both see it. You both recognize the beauty of it.
Hmm.
In the space of grief, it's the same. Companioning grief is this idea of being with the person to say, I can't fix this because there's no fixing with grief, but I see it too. I see that this happened and I see that this is painful. I see that there's heartache. And again, while challenging, it's a beautiful moment for the person who's offering that to someone, but also on the receiving end. And that's what happened that day in my office. Someone finally knocked on the door and said, Mekel, can I come in and sit with you? And she didn't say anything. As a matter of fact, she acknowledged, I don't know what to say. Can I just sit with you? And it was the witnessing, or I should say, the witnessing of that experience that made it so profound and kept me on that job. I was on the verge of quitting, and then that happened.
That's beautiful. And to just be courageous enough to say, I don't know what to say to you, but I'm
Exactly.
here and I'm
That's right.
showing up.
That's right. Which is really what I think. I think there's a lot of fear for people who are supporting those who grieve because the question is, I don't know what to do and I don't know what to say. And I always challenge folks to realize that there is nothing you can say that's going to ease the pain. But your presence is so powerful because grieving people often feel like no one sees them, no one understands, no one gets it, which can lead to incredible isolation. And that just exacerbates the suffering.
Hmm. So you've got experience as a pediatric and family health psychologist, right?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
you've worked with children and families that face serious illness and loss.
Hmm.
Can you speak to our audience about how children experience and express grief differently from adults? And what guidance do you offer parents who are navigating their own grief while supporting their own kids?
Yes, I love this question. So, if we think about children, right, we've got to recognize that each child is on a different area or part of the continuum of development, right? And so, a 3-year-old and how they express and understand grief is very different than a 16-year-old and how they express and understand grief. So, if we start off with what I call the itty bitties, they are, still learning language. Cognitively, they have no grasp about the finality of grief, right? And so the
Mhm.
example that I'll share is a 3-year-old, even after their parent dies, may continue to ask, well, when is daddy coming home? Right? When am I going to see daddy? Is daddy going to meet us for dinner? Because the finality of grief is not solidified. The 16-year-old in that same situation cognitively understands that death is final. Dad is not coming back. There may be a longing for the connection, but he realizes that the person's not going to return. And so I think we have to understand that first, right? So that we don't assume that little kids understand the finality and sort of assert pressure on them to reach that stage. Really,
Yeah.
kids don't fully understand and grasp that. And of course, this is sort of individual, but the range would be around 10, 11, 12. Now that child's starting to appreciate the fact that this is final. Also, how kids communicate developmentally is different. So, 3-year-olds don't have the language around feelings and emotions and so forth. 16-year-olds are developing that, but it's definitely more solid. And so, how they express that as a little child may be behaviorally, right? So, the kiddo may be acting out, throwing tantrums, regressing, wanting to sleep with the caregiver, whereas before they didn't. 16-year-old can articulate with their words, I feel X. This is affecting me in this way, although it may still show up behaviorally, right? And so I think
Yes.
appreciating where that child is on the developmental lifespan is really important. And
Mhm.
then to your question about how can a parent sort of navigate their own grief as they're parenting their child who's grieving, I think what's really critical, and this may seem somewhat paradoxical, is it's okay for that child to see you grieve externally, or what we call mourning, to externalize your grief. And the reason for that is when grief is not discussed, we internalize and we sort of make assumptions, and then we actually create sort of a worse scenario than what it really is. And we also can create pockets of isolation, right? So over the years, as I've worked with parents, one of the things that I'll hear is, well, I don't want my child to see me struggling, right? They're dealing with enough. I don't want them to see me. And it takes a little bit of time to help that parent understand when your child sees you go through what I call the arc of emotion, right? The sadness presented itself, your child is able to see how that manifests in your world, and they're able to see how you not resolve grief but resolve the pain of that moment. That's a gift to them because now they realize they can do it too, right? And it creates opportunity for connection and conversation.
Mm. My family, when my son passed away, my younger son and my husband and I, we went to grief counseling
Hmm.
because I was like, oh, I don't, it's not that I don't have the tools in the toolbox. I don't even have the toolbox. So
Exactly.
I need,
I've been there. I've been there,
and I
and
mean, I think
I
it,
was a psychologist. Still couldn't find the toolbox.
right. And so, and I had always been this person who always came up with the plan B. And it was I remember sitting and thinking,
Hmm.
I don't know what to do. So
Hmm.
counseling was the first place because we knew that we didn't know what to do. We had to reach out to someone who
Hmm.
could navigate this with us. And it's funny, I'll tell you as a psychologist that I remember being in the parking lot with my son Brendan, who was 11 at the time, and he gives me permission to tell this story. He laughs at it now because he's 28 now.
Oh, okay.
So, but we were in the parking lot and he was like, I am not going in there. And I'm like, you are so going in there.
Hmm.
We were having
Hmm.
this kind of back and forth. And so I said, please just go in and talk to this lady for this hour. I'm going to be right here. And then you can tell me what you want and what you feel about it when you get out, and we'll figure it out from there. But just give me
Hmm.
this 1 hour. So off he goes in there. And he came out and he was like, I don't need to tell you anything we talked about.
He felt so empowered, like this is my private
He
space.
did. That was the thing he took from it. And I was like,
Ah.
"You're right." I said, "You don't." And I said, "I really trust the lady that you're you're talking to, and I know that what you're talking, you need to have your own space, and it's different from what I need.
Yeah.
And so I was one of the things that I think that we were so proud of as a family is we recognized we didn't know what we were doing. That
Yep.
we were proud of
Mhm.
that. We
Mhm.
recognized we don't know what we're
Yes.
doing. We needed
Yes.
help.
Yes.
But the other thing was, as I was writing, and this was in the first year, we made tears normal. And I explained to Brendan
Mhm.
that sometimes when I was writing, I was working through a really difficult part of my grief
Mhm.
and that it would cause me to cry. But my tears were okay. And what I described it as was I was letting steam off my grief kettle.
Oh, I
It
love
was
that. I love that, Kelly. I might steal that. I'll give you credit.
oh, go ahead. Because it would build and build and build, and then the tears would flow, and then it was okay again. Everything went back down to the same level. It was calm. The kettle was turned off. And so what I found was at first it was uncomfortable,
Mhm.
but then when I was writing, if the tears came, sometimes I'd see this little 11-year-old stick his head in and say, "You good?" And I would
Mommy,
say, "Yeah."
mommy, do you need to let off some steam? I love this. I love this
So I
conversation.
said, "Yes, I'm absolutely fine." And then he would go on with his day,
Mhm. Yeah.
not upset about it. He just knew that this was part of what I was doing at that moment, and it was gonna pass.
Yeah.
I'm very thankful that we did that
Yes. Yes.
because
What
I
a
look at
gift.
him now and how he expresses his emotions, how he has encountered other, losses in life, and how he has helped his friends through difficult times,
Yeah.
and I'm very thankful that we made this normal.
Yes, because it is, because it is, and in that space, you really provided an opportunity to be a mirror, right? So that he, when he looked at you, could see, I see that mommy's in pain or dad's in pain, and I'm in pain too, and that's okay. And that's really where we've got to get to societally is to really normalize our humanity. You know,
Yeah.
I sort of liken. I love the tea kettle metaphor, which I'll use, but I usually think about grief as a balloon and all of these life experiences, whether things we enjoy or things that are stressful, losses, they're expanding our internal balloon. And we know that if you continue to add air over time, there's nowhere for that air to go. It's going to pop. What I've learned as a grieving heart, and even as I've worked with clients, is that it pops in a variety of ways. Sometimes it pops physically, where people are experiencing physical deterioration because of grief. Sometimes it can result in profound depression, including suicidal ideation.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's irritability and outbursts, right? Because that energy in the balloon, that air has got to get out. And so I love that you told your son, look, tea kettle is brewing. We've got to let this out because it probably resulted in you over time not experiencing some of those internalized consequences that people who avoid grief sometimes do.
I always called that first year the most awake year of my life.
Mm, mm,
So much wisdom comes from grief. W
I would agree.
What speak to us about that, about the wisdom of grief.
Yeah. So I will say that the first year and a half, I probably would not have said that. Grief was not a wise um, professor. It was something that I actively worked to outrun. I'm a very competitive person, naturally competitive with myself. And I was determined that I was going to beat grief. I put on my track shoes and I thought, I'm just going to continue to run and work and hustle and not address that. And eventually I'll get so far ahead of it that it won't have the chance to catch up with me. But of course, we know that it does. What I found though, as I sat with my own therapist and had conversations about loss, was the beauty in allowing grief to be present and sitting on the bench with it. Now, this was a hard sell for me because of my mentality about, achievement and so forth. But I sat in one particular counseling session, and my therapist said something that was so profound. It became the title of my book, one of my books. Mekel, what would it look like if you relaxed into the pain of grief? And I resisted that and no showed appointments for a couple months. Then it dawned on me, I wonder what that could look like, and resumed. But as I continued to allow myself to relax into that pain, I did discover the wisdom. And I discovered primarily that I have more in me than I knew. From a spiritual perspective, I realized that there were opportunities for me to grow more in intimacy with God, more than I had ever had before. And also, there were opportunities for my community to show up in ways I had resisted previously. So these served as sort of portals, if you will, to grow as I grieved.
Mm. Talk to me about the faith component and growing that and what that meant for you with your individual grief, but also with your professional practice.
Yeah. So I am a Christian. That's my faith perspective. And before my mom died, I would say that I knew about God. I said this on another podcast. My mom was not just my mom, she was my best friend. I was single. She was my boyfriend. She was my shopping partner, my prayer partner, all these things. And so when she died, it felt like multiple people died. It was very devastating. Um, but one of the things that I realized in her death was how much I had elevated her to this place of godship in my life. When a problem came, I turned to my mom. I was not opening up a Bible or praying or seeking out any, spiritual counsel. I would call my mom. And so one of the portals for me was to be able to access God because that's all I had. That's all I had. This
Yeah.
is friends and family didn't show up and attempt to support me, but my heart wasn't open to that. And so I literally found myself on the floor of a hotel room crying out to God. And he met me in that moment where there was just, it's hard to explain, but just an overwhelming sense of, I'm going to be in this with you. And I'm going to be here to support you. And so that really transformed my grief. And now I can say, I know God, not I know about God. But I think, to sort of talk about the contrary perspective, for a lot of folks, death and grief can create a lot of uncertainty and anger towards God. And that's
Yeah.
okay too. That's okay too to have questions because it is unfair to have, your mom diagnosed with a diagnosis and 30 days later she's gone. It is
Yeah.
okay to be angry about the fact that life didn't go the way that you anticipated. So I think there's room for all of these iterations in our questions in faith.
Mhm.
But for me, it's definitely deepened my resolve, and I know God to be true from my own experience.
Sorry, I got a little emotional when you were saying that about lying on the hotel room floor.
Hmm.
And I, I, I was sitting on a little bump in the sand on the shore of a lake,
Hmm.
and God whispered in my ear. It was it was definite because I didn't know what to do, and then I that same overwhelming feeling of
Hmm.
not being alone in it.
Yep.
I mean, I almost burst into tears when you said it because that's how I felt. I was like, "Oh, so I don't need to drive this bus. Okay.
Hmm.
Okay." And I
Yeah.
also knew at that very moment to start looking for gratitude right away. And
Hmm.
I know that sounds weird. That
No,
my
no, it doesn't.
like it just I just knew that that was the way through.
Hmm.
Um
Hmm.
and I also knew if I didn't start doing it right away, I wasn't going to get there. I was going to fall off
Yeah.
this abyss. That's how
Yeah.
I felt.
Yeah, I think one of the concerns I had leading up to me starting to relax into the pain of my mom's death was a fear that if I unleash all of these emotions, that I wouldn't survive it. And there was a period where I think I was walking myself right into a good old fashioned depression. I didn't realize it because I was so hyperactive, which is sort of a misnomer. I think we share this in our trainings is that sometimes we assume that someone's going to come back and be lethargic and not have the energy, which can happen. But there are people who also come back fully energized because they're wanting to push through so hard, and that was me. I was the Energizer Bunny. If you looked at me from the outside, you would have thought she's fine. I always sort of joke that I got more promotions, more accolades, more, atta girls the year and a half after my mom died than at any point in my career. But I was suffering inside, and so I think it's important to realize that. But it was in the moment of being on the hotel floor, and I forgot to share when I hit the ground on the floor, my first instinct, because again, I had always called my mom, was to call people. And I did. I got on my phone and I was calling people. And for whatever reason, I'm going to chalk it up to God wanted that to be about me and him. Nobody answered the phone. And so I'm laying there going, all I have is God in this moment. And he came into the space. I cannot explain it. But it was, like you said, an overwhelming sense of presence. And I knew that I was going to be okay. And like you, determined that if I did not start leaning into this, acknowledging the reality of this, and seeking out support and finding pockets of joy, that I was not going to survive, that I was going to enter, a true depression.
Like with gratitude and grief, they can walk together because it doesn't change the pain of your loss. It can't.
No.
It cannot change what you have lost, and you're still going to have that pain. But it does have the power to alleviate some of the suffering that comes with that pain.
Hmm.
And gratitude also has this ability to anchor you to the present moment. Because when you are looking for something to be grateful for,
Hmm.
you are in the here and now where you are okay.
That's right.
You're not in the past thinking about your regrets. You're not worrying about what your future is going to be like. You're right here, right now. And so you have that moment of reprieve. Even if it's just for one moment a day, you have this moment of reprieve.
Hmm.
What do you say to the people that you work with about gratitude?
Yeah. Kelly, I'll be honest with you. It is something that I very delicately talk about. I remember sitting with my own therapist after my mom died and her sharing this exercise. The exercise was, Mekel, I was living in LA. Uh, I would love for you to take some trips around the city and just walk around. And the only assignment, if you will, is to identify things that stand out to you, things that spark a little, ooh, that's cool, or wow, that's interesting. And it was this idea of present mindedness and
Mhm.
finding slivers of joy. Now, I'm sort of rebellious, and I was like, oh, this is the worst assignment. Everything's gray, and my life is muted. I'm not going to be able to get out and see any color. But that really was the point of being able to identify it. So when I talk with clients, I'm very sensitive about this because I know that there is a mindset that you're not going to be able to experience that ever again.
Yeah.
And from a faith perspective, it can sound like spiritual bypassing, like just just focus on the goodness of God and everything's going to be fine. And I understand that because I have felt that. So we delicately talk about creating space and constantly acknowledging, as you said, that grief and hope, grief and faith, grief and joy, grief and gratitude can exist in the same space. It may be that today, 99% of what you see is the grief. and only
Yeah.
1% is your capacity to see something hopeful. Over time, let's sort of um, do an experiment and see how that percentage may grow over time and with intention. And over time, that tends to happen with folks if they are open to that.
I remember, and I've said this before, one of the things that I was grateful for one day was that I was able to walk to the mailbox,
Yes.
because I would look out my door and say, okay, the coast is clear. I don't want to talk to anybody, because whenever I would open my mouth, I would
Hmm.
cry.
Yep. Yep.
Um, Another example, couldn't come up with anything for the whole day. It was one of those big grief days.
Hmm.
And I was lying in bed at the end of the night, and I said, I've made this promise. I made the promise that day at the lake.
Hmm.
So the only thing I could come up with was that my broken heart continued to beat today. Okay, I'm done. Good night.
That's it.
That was the only thing I
That's
could
it.
figure out.
Yeah. I got off the floor.
Yep.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's okay.
It is okay. It is okay. I think that, again, back to Western society and sort of this mindset of achievement and go getterism, we have to be so careful that we don't push people or push ourselves to feel like we've got to come back in this revolutionary, evolved, high energy state. It's okay if today the only thing you did was brush your teeth. It's okay if the only thing that you were able to do was get up, maybe put on something halfway presentable, and just acknowledge that it's another day. Yeah.
Mm.
And those are big wins. Those are big wins when you've experienced a profound loss. And so I will challenge folks to be able to look at those things and really sit and celebrate that, because it is absolutely soul crushing for someone who you love to no longer be there. To this day, I'm 13 years in, and there are moments, Kelly, where I instinctually will pick up my phone and call my mom. I still have her number in my mind, and it will automatically go to the keys on the phone, and then I realize, gosh, she's not there, and it feels like the first day.
Yeah.
So we have to celebrate these small little wins and just know that I got through that. Let me see if I can get through the next 5 minutes. Did that? Great. Let me see if I can make it till noon. And then we realize that we're continuing to take steps.
Yeah, I think it's important for us. And you talk a lot about self compassion, and you talk about cultures that reward muscling through, which I think you touched on briefly. Like, just
Mm,
keep
yes.
going.
Yes. Yeah. Well, here's the thing, sort of to tie this in with like workplace. So I was raised in a very achievement oriented world. Love my parents. They were both in the Air Force, but the mindset was we're going to get up. My brothers and I were the only kids at 7 o'clock on Saturday out riding bikes. Why? Because we had already been up cleaning and making up our bed. So achievement is just in my DNA. And so rewiring that has been incredibly difficult. And even to this day, I have to sort of sit with, am I attempting to numb by doing? Sometimes the answer is yes. And then I have to pull back and say, how can I sit and surrender and allow whatever comes up to come up, knowing that there's nothing wrong with that and that I need that. But when we put this mindset and sort of put it back in the workplace, you can see how that can be really difficult for someone grieving, right? The
Yeah.
expectation in the workplace, like you've got to churn and produce and be productive, yet you're
Yeah.
tired and can't concentrate and are having difficulty even getting out of bed to come to work. We've got to be really careful with that. And so that's where the self compassion is needed for the person, but also the people around you to be compassionate to say, you know what, you showed up today. Let's talk about what load you can carry today. And that's enough. And how can we
Mm,
help support the load that you cannot carry? We'll carry that for you today.
that's beautiful. I want to ask you about this world that we live in right now. Our world today is probably the most complex and difficult right now that we've all seen in our lifetime.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I feel like we've lost our way with empathy and compassion. And so when we when we can't see people's humanity in certain situations, that it's obvious that they are being hurt,
Hmm.
how in the heck do we navigate all of that? I'm giving you the hardest question. I apologize. How do we navigate all of that
Yeah.
when our hearts are broken?
Yeah. Um, that is a complex question. And I think part of what makes this difficult is this world that we live in that's so easily forward facing. Like
Mm,
social media has given us the opportunity to not have a filter, right? We can turn on the video and just record live. And I think what people are missing is reflection, right? It's important before we really have any interaction in the world that we take a step back and think, what's my motivation for doing or saying this? What is the impact of my doing and saying this? And what may be the consequences of my doing and saying this? We're not doing that. So if you think about this pendulum, there are people who, because of all the uncertainty and fear, perhaps aren't saying anything. So they're sort of in turtle mode.
mm,
Then there are the people who are in lion mode, like we are out there roaring and fighting. And I think that there's a sweet spot in the middle where we can be vocal, but if we don't go into turtle, we're not going to be able to assess who's in front of us, to your point of not seeing each other.
yeah,
And I think it requires that we be intentional with ourselves to pull ourselves back inward, right? A lot of the leadership work that we do, when my partner and I show up, leaders are often shocked when we point the mirror back to them and say, how can we look within? And they're like, well, I thought I was here to learn about how to do something outwardly. You are. Yet the prerequisite for that is that you look inward. And so I think that we as individuals have to be super intentional about getting into turtle mode for periods to assess, wow, what just happened? And how might that family be feeling, for example, in the face of another person's loss, right?
mhm, mhm,
When we do that, we can say, oh gosh, I know how that feels to have experienced tremendous loss. So now my heart can beat, the blood can flow towards the person and have a point of connection as opposed to just rallying against. So we're going to continue to be in the lurch, Kelly, if we remain outward like lions.
yeah,
If we
yeah.
don't remember to go back into turtle mode every now and then, it's going to continue to be problematic. So my hope is that people are more reflective and then responsive, not reactive.
That is my hope as well. And I love that you get leaders to look inward because you are
Mm,
right. Our own learned life experiences frame everything that we do in the world.
yes,
And so having a reflection, and we very rarely do look within.
we rarely. Well, we're not trained to. I mean,
No.
again, back to our society, it's like, let's do outwardly. Everything is external. And so that's why I think, as a psychologist, when people are thinking about therapy, like, I don't need that because they know this is going to be a mirror held up to you in the space with someone else looking at you. And that is so incredibly intimidating. But the more we engage what I like to call micro practices, like how can you look at yourself if only for a moment today? And even asking simple questions. What did I learn from someone in the community today? That's a self reflective opportunity. Or
Mhm.
where did I most deeply feel today and what was going on when I felt that? These micro practices help bring us back inward, and then we're able to live outwardly in a more productive way.
That's beautiful. I want to pull a quote that you said. I'm sorry.
I love that you love quotes, by the way. I have sticky notes of quotes everywhere.
I do too. And my husband's like, when we were sorting things in my office, and he was like, "Why do you have a freezer bag filled with quotes? I don't understand."
Oh, that's fun. Oh, you just gave me an idea of each day. What a fun little exercise. Pull one out. Oh gosh, I may have to take that. I love that.
Mm-hmm. I tell you, quotes, they really, it sets the tone for me for the day.
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
Makes me think, oh, and then I can move on with my day. So, full
Right.
quotes from you.
Okay.
Self compassion goes well beyond traditional self care strategies. It's about treating and honoring yourself as you would a trusted friend.
Mm,
I think that's beautiful on the practice of self compassion and how difficult it is for us to do that.
yeah. And you saying that reminds me, we were talking about why it's so difficult to see others. If we think about this definition of self compassion, it's sort of treating ourselves as we would others,
Yeah.
right? And so perhaps the challenge with self compassion is that as we interact with others, there's a strain there, which makes it difficult for us to even extend that love to ourselves. And so all of these elements matter. As I interact with you and see you, I'm better able to see myself. As I'm able to see myself, I can see you. And so there's interplay, again, which I think is critical for us to move society forward in a healthy way. Yeah.
Absolutely. The goal is not to remove pain, it is to help children feel supported while experiencing it. I I just have such a great respect for you supporting grieving children.
Mm.
And when I read that quote, um, of course, your own personal feelings always bubble up. But I feel like I remember reading an article and being terrified because it talked about when a parent loses a child, how the remaining children can sometimes just kind of feel lost because the parent, and I was terrified.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
going to screw it up.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I love that you address that we just need to support them at their developmental level.
That's right. And serve as a model, as you did, to
Mm.
show that externalizing our pain is okay. As a matter of fact, it's necessary. Yeah.
And this one is my favorite. If you keep your heart open through everything, your pain can become your greatest ally in your life's search for love and wisdom.
Yes. Yes. It's that heart space. There's a saying that we've all heard: a closed mouth never gets fed, and a closed heart is not able to be watered. And it's the watering of the heart that creates a softness that we need to be able to self compassionately give to ourselves and also love others well. So, open heart.
I was raised as a Catholic
Hmm.
Christian,
Hmm.
and but I read about all different religions when I
Hmm.
was grieving
Hmm.
for my
Oh,
search for meaning.
yes, yes, absolutely.
And one of the things that I had it's a book about this big. It's called The Pocket Pema Chodron. She's a Buddhist nun,
Okay.
and she talks about the bodhicitta heart, and it is this unchangeable part within you that no
Mm.
matter what happens to you in your life,
Hmm.
it's always there. It's
Mm.
always there for you to return to and to find.
I love that.
And
You'll have to share the link to that book.
oh,
I love that.
I
Yeah.
will. And I've had this book in my
Mm.
purse since 2009. It is a
Mm.
wreck. But when I am still to this day, when I'm
Hmm.
outside and I feel the rub,
Yep.
I pull it out of my purse and I read one. It's just like little page here, little page there, and I'll read a little page,
Yes.
settle down.
I love that. God, that is so. I'll have to really reflect on that more deeply, but that is such a profound thought about the heart. So beautiful. Yeah, and I love that your heart was even open in this journey of exploring other philosophies, perspectives, ways of viewing the world, because I think that that keeps our heart malleable, right?
Yes.
Which is
Yeah.
so critical as we grieve. Yeah, so beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Oh,
Yeah.
of course. I mean, I think that that's the whole, if you look at the broken, beautiful me heart, that was my belief.
Mm, mm.
The Japanese art of kintsugi is that when we put our heart back together, um, it's more valuable because of the areas that were broken.
I literally just bought a book focused on that philosophy, and I'm
You do?
waiting. Yeah, just excited to dive in. It's like the merging of these sort of broken pieces to create this beautiful mosaic. I love the idea of that because that is what we're doing as we
Yeah.
continue to live and grieve.
I read an article that compared the art of kintsugi of how a woman should view her body after childbirth, even that
Mm,
those stretch marks make her
yes,
more beautiful,
beautiful. Yeah, so good,
right?
so
That
good.
that we think about these things that break us, but they give us who we are.
Yeah, yeah, so good. Ah, so good. We could probably talk for 4 hours. I have no doubt because you are very. I love these conversations that feel so rich and with so much depth, and I can tell that that's how you are, which is beautiful.
Will you come back again for part two?
I would love that. I would love that. That would be an honor. Yes,
Because
yes.
I will tell you that there's so much that I didn't ask you that I wanted to ask you
Yeah.
in this
No, I would
time.
love that. Yeah, no, thank you. Um, there's so much richness to death to death, but also just grieving in the process of survivorship that yeah, I would love to. Thank you for the invitation. And thank you for
Absolutely.
today.
Okay. So, I've thoroughly enjoyed this hour. Before we go, please tell our listeners where they can find you
Yeah.
and your book and how they can avail of your services.
Perfect. Yeah. So if you want to learn more about Bloomwell Partners, my co founded company with my partner, Janet Willem Wright, you can go to growwithbloomwell.com to get more information there. I spend a lot of time on Instagram, and so you're welcome to go there. My handle is at Dr. Mekel, Drmekel. And then you can purchase my book on Amazon, where you could find other major books. It's called Relaxing into the Pain, My Journey into Grief and Beyond.
Thank you so much for being on the podcast. I so appreciate it and can't wait to have you back.
Thank you so much. Heart.
Back at you.
Yes. Thank you.